All right, everyone. We got a couple new stories on ancienthistoryx.com that are really interesting. I had a little hiatus for a while, but a couple of these papers have come through with some very interesting information and was able to get a couple articles out and find the time here to make a short little video off the cuff discussing them. Um, One of them is in Peru, the subject of the paper, and the other is in Mesoamerica, specifically in Mexico. One has to do with the Maya, and another has to do with the civilization before the Inca, and then it crossed over into the Inca. So let's start off with the Maya one. This was a major complex that was discovered in 2017 with LiDAR. It is the largest Mayan construction or um, site um, that has been found to date. And what's crazy about it is they're saying that this is the first ever Mayan complex ever found, or the earliest ever found. There were no pyramids. But what there was this massive man-made plateau or platform with adjacent canals and walls and outline of a city. They discovered a couple mounds, and thankfully, they have gotten on site and began to excavate. Now, some of this stuff might seem mundane, like finding ceramics. They were able to use the artifacts that they found to date the site in different phases. The ceramics came later, but the earliest stuff they found were jadeite objects. The jadeite objects were arranged in these cruciform pits, these X-shaped pits, which were inset and then offset from each other. And inside of these pits, they had aligned the four sides with the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west. And they had used different pigments to indicate the cardinal directions. And one has to just wonder, like, what was going through the mind of these ancient people? Obviously, they must have used the sun in order to track the cardinal directions. We all know the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Did they have a concept of east and west and north and south? They certainly had a concept of the four cardinal directions. One might think, looking at ancient people or putting yourself in ancient person's shoes, yeah, you certainly could see where the sun rose and where the sun set. But then would you infer from that the um, perpendicular directions from that and find the center point? Um, again, I'm not a Mayanist, so I tend to bounce around uh, between as many different cultures as I can find as um, appropriate when different papers and articles of research come to the forefront. But things like that just make me question, how were they able to ascertain that it's more than just the direction of the sunrise and the sunset, that there was a cardinal direction of north and south perpendicular to the rise and fall of the sun. And how did they come up with that concept? If you're not living in modern times, you just put yourself back in the times that these people lived in the wilderness amongst themselves, no quote unquote technology. Um, it's pretty astonishing to think about it in that respect. And this site actually, what they're saying is a mirror of the cosmos because this center crucifix form aligned with two specific dates, October 17th and February 24th, with the rising sun. The rising sun rose above, directly above this, I presume at noon, because they don't really get into detail too much with the paper, but that's what I would presume, because they said it was directly below. Obviously, when it's on the horizon, you just see it off in the distance, but they said that these forms were in alignment. And those particular dates are exactly 130 days apart, which ties into one of the Mayan calendars, the 260-day count. So, my wheels started spinning immediately thinking about this. If they got to the point where they were building this massive plateau, this massive earthen plateau, and let me digress. Also, canals. They had surrounded a lake that had already, there it is, right here, um, existed naturally, built a dam around it, and started excavating these canals radiating outward from it. So I don't even think we're really done understanding what's going on here, as far as above, so below. Like, were they mirroring a constellation? What were they doing? They're saying it's a reflection of the cosmos, but the detail hasn't quite come out yet completely. Other than the fact that the center of this platform aligns with the sunrise on those particular dates. And back to that discussion, mapping out one of their calendars, which is the 260-day count. So what that got me thinking is, in order to be building this massive engineering feat to mirror or mark this calendrical date, they must have had this system in an oral tradition, or as it's known, the day keepers, for who knows how long. I mean, who knows how long? But finally, this is, to our knowledge, the first time they ever encoded one of their calendars into one of their monuments. And I just think we're scratching the surface here with this. These are some of the objects that they found. Again, this article can be found on ancienthistoryx.com. Mayan Proto-Genesis Monument, Aguada Fénix. I hope I'm saying that right. Gave it a shot. Um, but they have all these jadeite. They call them greenstone. Sorry, not jadeite. Greenstone, which could be jadeite, serpentine, or chlorite. They haven't had these tested yet. So they don't know exactly what specific greenstone each one of these are, but they are greenstone. They're calling this thing right here an alligator. They think it's an alligator. And I put that in the article because that's what they're saying. You know, I necessarily, I guess I can see it, but at the same time, is it really an alligator? Are we sure? Like, these markings, they could indicate some of the ridges of, what an alligator looks like, the cartilage and this and that. But I'm also, leaving a good possibility that this is not an alligator at all and it's something else. Now, something else, do I mean like out of this world or alien tech? No, not at all. but maybe it's not exactly an alligator. Um, so one of the interesting things about this is that they hit a roadblock in building their canal system. They hit some bedrock that was too difficult for them to carve through, and so they stopped. One of the things the researcher and the archaeologist who wrote the paper, the most recent paper, now this isn't the only excavation, it's the most recent. Earlier excavations had pulled artifacts like this, but this was from the terminal pre-classic and late classic period. This was after the site had been abandoned. People had come back and put some effigies down, but the core archaeology now is getting back to the root and the beginning of this site, where the jadeite things were found. Now, some of these jadeite objects were arranged like this four cardinal directional layout in some odd shapes. I didn't include the images in here because you can only stuff so many images in one article without oversaturating it. But if you go to the paper, which is linked in here, you'll see them. And don't forget to always check when you're looking at a paper the supplemental data. The supplemental data is sometimes really where the juice is. And if you just gloss over the supplemental data, you're gonna sometimes miss a lot. Sometimes it's a nothing burger, but when a paper has a supplemental data, you really want to check that out. Um, so let's see here. We're talking the main construction was 1050 BCE for the plateau. I'm sorry, the ceramics I mentioned at the outset came later. They actually were the earliest, around 1200 BC. So my apologies, that was mistaken when I first started. I do this stuff off the cuff. I don't have time to rehearse scripts or any of that anymore. So I just basically kind of come out here and go balls out and try to recap um, these articles as best I can. When you're digesting all this kind of information, and especially doing multiple projects at once, your recollection, God bless you if it's spot on, but without rehearsing, yeah. So, anyways, my mistake there. The ceramics came later. The greenstone stuff was part of the original inflection point and construction. But if you want to check this out more in depth, because I want to get over to the other article, check it out at ancienthistoryx.com. Really something here that deserves a lot more investigation, and I'm glad that they're doing it. When they find these sites with LiDAR, and let me tell you, there's like 10,000 of them already. I have I was able to stumble upon a LiDAR database that is like a remnant on the internet. I don't even think it's supposed to be there. Like it's like a broken link to a LiDAR project in the Yucatan. And I've put it on X a couple times, just kind of briefly going over it. But there's at least, and I'm definitely being conservative when I say 10,000 ruins in the jungle. And my biggest apprehension with all of that is like, okay, this is great. You found something with LiDAR like this that's incredible. Like, what are you going to do about it? Is it just going to sit there? Lots of times this is an inhospitable, unaccessible jungle, ruled by drug lords and kingpins. And if the drug lords and kingpins aren't going to kidnap you and hold you for ransom, you're going to get, a flesh eating bacteria. It's going to fucking kill you, or a snake bite, or or something. So, I don't begrudge the fact that they can't get to it, but it's really frustrating to think that there's thousands upon thousands of sites that they found with LiDAR that they're never going to get to. That's why this is terrific that they've actually gotten here and they're doing the excavations. And I'll be excited to follow this site and see what kind of updates come from it. So the next article here is in the Andes, and people may think this is boring. I don't know what the deal is, but I've seen this around over the years minimally. Didn't pay much mind to it until I read this paper, and that is the what's colloquially referred to as the Band of Holes. The Band of Holes is a stretch of thousands of these cup-shaped holes, and I don't have a really great picture of them here because I was trying to really, encapsulate the story more. But if you look here briefly on this header image, which I've superimposed here for artistic impression, you can see this wave of 5,200 cup marks cut into the ridge of the mountains in the Andes. And for years, people didn't know what the heck these were. I think they've been featured on Ancient Aliens and stuff like that. And because in my research, it talks about and put in the article the conjecture about things like that. But more of some of the down to earth theories were that they were water to retain water or defensive trenches for warfare. Turns out none of that's true. And in fact, what is true is way beyond anything I would have comprehended. And, that's my own ignorance. I don't know anybody else's, but I always kind of brush this off as like, okay, there's some fucking holes in the ground. What's the big deal? Um, well, it is a big fucking deal. Um, they did some photogrammetry scans of the entire swath, which is a kilometer and a half long, 5,200 cut marks. And what they were able to determine is that they are separated in blocks, numerical blocks that are specific to each block. And they specified in this particular paper three different blocks: block A, block B, block C. I put 1, 2, and 3 in here because I'm trying to convey like that there's actually 60 of these blocks or sections, and these are just three of them. And what they found is that in block one or block A, you have nine rows of 8 holes, accumulating of 72 holes. In block two or B, you have 6 rows of 7 plus 1 row of 8, 50. Now, 72 I already know is a processional number, but I won't even get into that. But you can see the effort they made to get to 50 by adding the 8, the single row of 8 there. So I don't wonder what's going on there. And then C or block 3, 12 rows alternating 7, 8, 7, 8, 7. But we got some numerical system going on here that I'm not even really diving into yet, but it piques my interest nonetheless. Like, what is the significance of this numerical system? That's not the point of the article, though. The point of the article is what they figured out in this paper, and I tend to agree with them because they have the evidence. They took samples inside sporadically throughout the kilometer and a half stretch of pop marks, and they took samples out of the dirt. And what they found is that inside each one of these, there's remnants of different commodities, textiles, grain, metals, like anything you could possibly think of. And they did their due diligence because they know what they're doing. They've devoted their lives to this, and I'm just being a reporter here. They know that where this lies on this mountain ridge is a inflection point, and it lies between the sea and the inland. And they had different communities who had different um, practices and gathered different commodities, as one could imagine, from the ocean dwellers to the inland dwellers. And what they figured out is that this was a massive meeting place where trade would take place. And they would place their commodities into these cups. And it was a ledger to keep track of what was going from one side to the other. And it was meant to keep everything even and keep everything honest. And that's when the light bulb went off in my head that that's exactly like the blockchain. When you buy and sell Bitcoin, they know that there's a fixed amount of Bitcoin, and each time that a transaction takes place on one side or the other of the ledger, you need to account for the total of Bitcoin that's remaining so that there isn't any bad transactions. So this is basically like a massive ancient blockchain where commodities were placed inside of these cups, and one side or the other, the buyer, the seller, would extract the commodity from one side to the other and then track it. And if there was a deficit, say, for example, I give here that if you were in the 50 hold unit here, B, and you were supposed to bring all 50 units, but you only brought 42, they would know they were 8 short. And right there, being 8 short, whatever probably the next one over or what have you, they were able to keep track of IOUs and things like that. So, like, it's not a literal blockchain, like, don't get crazy, but the analogy is apropos 100%. And what they are saying is, and it makes sense to me, now, obviously they have no proof, this is conjecture, but to flesh it out is the people would walk up and down and they would actually be able to visibly see and count how many cup marks were filled, and there would be no ambiguity between what was transpired and what was transferred. So, you know, I just think this is a remarkable understanding of what was going on here. Um, and it's worth a read. Um, it ties into the Quipus a little bit, where they had this numerical system for record keeping, but this was, as again, more in line with the concept of blockchain. This was open source. Everyone could see it. Everyone could see it, and everyone could verify it. There was no hidden um, transactions taking place, whereas the Quipu was held by elite, special people, counted by special people. So if you were outside of the holder of the Quipu, you really didn't know about it. This here was communal and crossed um, different communities, or they're saying up to 4 centuries, up to 4 centuries. So check this out. It's called Monte Sierpe, saying that properly, Serpent Mountain, Peru's ancient physical blockchain. You can find both of these articles on ancienthistoryx.com, and I hope to see you there. Thank you.